Hi, everybody, and hello, people online. Welcome to the 54th series of the Martin Center Research Seminars, of which our theme this year is forms of dialogue, so how we communicate with architecture, how it communicates back, which is topical for some of the things our guest today will speak on, and how we communicate across the profession and with people from other disciplines. So we're really excited to have Delfina Fanitini von Dittmar with us today. And Delfina is a design researcher and lecturer at the Royal College of Art in London, where she received her PhD, which she'll be talking about today. And before that, she trained as a biologist. And her transdisciplinary practice encourages a reflective approach towards technological smartness and ecological futures. In 2021 and 2022, she was a design researcher in residence at the Design Museum, which I think she's also going to talk a little bit about. And she recently co-founded the Design and Ethics Special Interest Group at the Design Research Society. We're really excited to have her with us. When I discovered Delfina and her work, it was really exciting, and one of those moments where you get a little buzz where you really want to know more about how that person thinks and approaches their practice. So that's why she's here, and we could give her a warm welcome.
Many thanks, Sam, for the invitation. Today, I'm gonna deliver this lecture called The Role of the Idiot, and it's gonna be a very honest journey since my biology studies and up to this point now where I'm teaching at the Royal College of Art. As Sam was mentioning, I have a background in biology. Back in the times, my BA was like a 5 years degree in which it really gave me an understanding of systems and interdependencies. I had to go through genetics, microbiology, physiology, ecology, evolution. So that was a really great background study for me to then take it to where I am now. In the image in the back are some of my experiments. I was fascinated by neurons, obsessed with them. That's why I actually went into a biology degree rather than studying art, architecture, or design, which actually seems like the most logic avenue for me at the time. This is brain-derived neurotrophic factor called BDNF, and I was increasing the secretion of these factors in neurons of some rats, and they're very important actually for neuronal survival and also growth. And why you see them shining is because this secretion, I marked it with like a green fluorescent protein, which is actually coming from a jellyfish. So it's very molecular, as you can tell. After I finished my degree, I did actually 1 year of a MA program in Stockholm in the School of Design. It was a transdisciplinary course. So I was working with landscape architects, designers, graphic designers, artists. And when I finished, I took the decision to do a PhD at the Royal College of Art. And the outcome, you can see in the picture that used to be my office in Kensington. It's The Idiot and the appendix called Idiotivity. Very much influenced by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Maybe some of you have read him before, and I'll explain how Dostoevsky and the Idiot connects finally to my practice-based design PhD at the RCA. But just to give you a little bit more of a context, my PhD supervisor, primary PhD supervisor, was Dr. Ranulph Lambert. He was an architect from actually the AA. He was a student of Gordon Pask. So if you came perhaps to Paul Pangaro's talk some weeks ago, you would have heard about conversation theory. But it was a very exciting moment. It was the 60s, 70s in the AA, so it was all happening. It was all very experimental. He's the same generation of Archibram. So he was actually my tutor. And when I met him in Belgium in an architecture school called St. Lucas. He was doing some PhD sessions with the RMIT. And he told me that the best place for me to do my PhD would be not an architecture school, but this design course at the RCA. And what he really wanted me to do was to move me from scientific methods to a design kind of landscape. So I put a picture in the middle of how the studio looked. And it was very exciting. I was doing my PhD with people such as Daisy Ginsberg, also architect. And I don't know if you've seen her latest work. If not, I really recommend you to see pollinator path making. Daisy has developed this AI platform for you to design in whichever garden you have the best conditions for pollinators. And it's very pretty. It's amazing because it's to think for other species. It's using AI, but also it's using her architecture background. So it was very experimental. I was surrounded by very exciting colleagues. At the same time, everybody was a designer. So you can see the desk, everything was like, people were doing models, people were hanging things in the wall. And I was completely paralyzed for my first 2 years. You can see my desk, it was absolutely blank. It was like a blank canvas. I had some books. And all what they wanted was to, they always tell me like, start making, start doing, read the design research methods book. And I was trying to do things, but it was just so not intuitive. And it took me actually 2 years of paralysis and blank desk to start developing some things. But also by reading all these design methods, and I have a good memory. I studied biology, I had to learn all those bacteria, plants, and species. So I could remember the method. It's not that I didn't understand the methods, but I didn't feel like doing any of them. I didn't feel co-designing, I didn't feel pure speculative design, I didn't feel participatory design. So yeah, there were 2 very tough years. And on top of that, at the second year, Ranulph, who brought me there, also died. So it was like super, also emotionally difficult. But I had a scholarship, I had to finish on time. And I also wanted to finish on time. So that's what I did. But just to give you a little bit of context on the time, I started my PhD in 2012. And I became really interested in this Internet of Things idea. This is a very corporate diagram of this Gardner hype cycle of emerging technologies. Maybe you might be familiar. If not, I'm going to briefly explain you. This really described how technology evolves. So there's like an innovation moment, which there's a lot of media. Generally, there's not usable, but there's a lot of buzz around it. Then you reach the peak of inflated expectations, and that's exactly the point where Internet of Things was when I was studying there. So most companies don't take very clever decisions, and they just stop there. And then you have the throw of disillusionment. There's a lot of customer dissatisfaction. They're really badly done or they're inadequate for the market. And very, very few of those companies really then kind of make it. So what I started to see in practice, removed from the graph, was all these innovations coming from Silicon Valley, especially like you have here, that button of Doritos that you could press. I mean, Doritos is an example. You had Red Bull detergent, but basically was an Internet of Things button for you to order things in your house. So you don't need to go through the internet, and you can place them wherever you think it's suitable. Smart toasters in which you can remote control, like when the toast should jump and how burned it should be. Bruno, it's a trash can that it will get all the dust from the bottle and put it into a bag, and also it will tell you when do you need to remove the bag. Petsy, it's a Internet of Things and camera in which from afar you can connect to your pet, so you can talk to your pet. At the same time, when you want to give a treat to your pet, you can deliver treats remotely. And what is really interesting is a lot of these things that I put here, because I had to revisit my PhD to deliver some talks like this. It's a lot of these things don't exist anymore. But also with this came to me, not only I thought it was very unnecessary innovations, but also they are using a lot of plastic. A lot of this technology uses extractive metals. So I saw those 2 problems hand by hand as well. But before I continue, I was also very interested in my PhD to see early attempts of connected or automated homes that are rarely talked about. And I think it's really nice to transmit this interesting part, mainly in the 80s. So a case that I really like is this feminist inventor called Frances Gabe, and she created the first self-cleaning house. And she actually converted her old house in a giant dishwasher. It's as if your house was inside. She put sprinklers all around, and in the next slide, I'm gonna show you a video because it's pretty amazing. But her problem was like, the problem of my house is that it's getting very dirty, and like I have no help. And that's coming from a woman that spent time at home. Then another example is John Rockney. He did the first connected toaster to the internet, and a year later, he actually added a metallic hand so he could take the toaster from the toaster. And I think one of the main difference with today's Internet of Things and the examples that I showed you before is there were very small data pools and computational capacity. There was no data aggregation. There was no big corporation behind. It was like DIY kind of stuff. And there was a very locational limit in terms of the information, and definitely was like no real time, no 24/7. I'm gonna show you Francis Gabe's. You can't hear her dialogue, but you'll see the self-cleaning house. I was telling you, she put all these sprinkles all around. And she's turning it on, and you can see the kitchen, how it's completely washed from inside. And then, I mean, it's a pity that you can hear her, but she was getting really angry because the water was like coming out of everywhere. And she was like this very mad inventor. So I encourage you to see the full video if you have the chance. But basically, there's a big difference in what you can see here, the floor angled so it can move all the water. It was coming from the problem of someone living in a house and actually was supposedly, if it would work, helping her to spend less time in cleaning, which is very different to a lot of these innovations, which is just about commodities being more easily accessible and all those things we can do without having all those things. But the Internet of Things concept as such, with such wording, came in 1999 by MIT researcher Kevin Ashton while working with Procter & Gamble. So it's really coming from a supply chain context. And the main advantage of having this Internet of Things technology applied was optimization, efficiency, tracking, management, and reducing cost. Another thing that I did in my PhD was to really frame what is this algorithmic paradigm in terms of objects being connected that was so different from the early examples that I showed you. And some important aspect is like, now we have behavioral data, there's a presentation and model of data gathered about our daily life with wearables, but also about our surrounding, including homes and cities. There's data aggregation, technology include big data and machine learning. And also there's automation in real time. But here are a couple of concepts that I want to bring into the discussion. One is the home as a living practice that is very different of the home as a supply chain. And I really like these quotes. They're very simple, but I think they're very spot on from Judy Wackman. Technical visions of the domestic space are often at the expense of the home as a living practice, and the complexities of humans impose limits on the mechanizations of life. At the same time, I was very inspired with Evgeny Morozov. Actually, later in life, I had the chance to talk longer with him. The tendency of technology to quickly fix a complex situation, and this idea of solutionism presumes rather investigate the problem it's solving, reaching for the answer before the question has been fully been asked. Another of these innovations in the time that I was very obsessed with was this Mother, which is this kind of Russian matryoshka IoT, and it was some kind of buttons, but some ideas was the one simple way of restraining you from eating snacks, sleep well and wake up refreshed. The one active way to stay fit just because of mapping out certain behaviors at home, as if all these things, sleeping, eating, and being fit was like a very linear, easy thing to do. But in my PhD, a part of understanding the technology, early origins, where are these ideas coming from, it was very important also to situate this idea of smartness. A lot of these things are smart appliances. So I was like, where are these ideas of smartness and this epistemology coming from? So I'll start by depicting AI origins. AI started after the Dartmouth conference in 1956, where John McCarthy and Marvin Mixley founded the artificial intelligence group at the MIT. As McCarthy described, the study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that machines can be made to simulate it. So this algorithmic / cognitive reductionist approach really permeates in how we frame artificial intelligence and this notion of intelligence. But understanding it better, it's clear that there are certain things there. One is this belief in the metaphor that the brain is the computer, or vice versa, the computer is the brain. And this doesn't even include the relevance of the connection between brain and body, not even to say brain, body, surrounding, unconsciousness, and many other things that we deal with, such as irrationality, for example, as well. There's a clear cause effect, and there's an understanding the world as it is. And I think that metaphor is quite important, actually, because this gives rise to technical models and informed design processes, which at the same time improves knowledge, politics that affects our bodies and also our surrounding. So this AI understanding really flourished during the 60s, and then was obviously permeating through all these big corporations in the 80s and 90s. And now, I mean, back then, early 2000s, tech giants, and as you might fully be aware, Silicon Valley is this epicenter of high-tech culture. It's very known for developing rapid technology development, and AI is one of the hottest trends, but really comes in line with that kind of cognitivist algorithmic paradigm understanding. So now I'm going to move a little bit from those initial concepts of Internet of Things, this kind of smartness understanding and origins of AI, to design research, which was actually the field where I had to operate. And one of the main experiments that has been done with me is a practice-based PhD. And as I told you before, I felt zero inspired with no methods. So I had to deliver my PhD. And what I ended up doing was inspired by this character, the idiot. I used my PhD as a space of bringing systemic and epistemological inquiry through this idea of smartness. And I created the idiot methodology. As you can say, the idiot itself has the idea of identification and IoT of Internet of Things within the idiotic process itself. So if I maybe could summarize the ingredients of this methodology, has a design practice-based element, action research, which is about this reflective practitioner, critical algorithmic studies, and design fiction as well. And you will slowly understand how all these things come together. I was also very inspired by STS scholar Isabel Stenger, who wrote a cosmopolitical proposal. She defines here the figure of the idiot as he or she is the one who always shows the others down. He or she receives consensual way in which the situation is presented and in which emergency is mobilized to action. He or she is a present and produce an interstice. And it to me was really important, that interstice space was something that I really tried to explore within the practice-based projects that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. Now, another interesting aspect of the idiot, I really like this idea that it serves as a satiric instrument for revealing corruption of the society and inadequacy of its value system. That's something I also tried to somehow incorporate. And now, quoting Deleuze and Guattari, that the idiot really wants to turn the absurd into a highest power of thought. So because I struggled so much these 2 first years of complete paralysis, I really want to somehow have some kind of fun as well during these kind of projects. And the RCA, what really allows me was to mix all these things and allowing me just to experiment with that. So what the idiot does is, super importantly, slow down. All these things happen so fast and we kind of get bombarded with these ideas and ways of living. So it's like, what are we busy doing? Where is this all heading? And how can we rethink asking idiotic questions? And in terms of understanding AI in context of my design research, as I mentioned to you before, AI was founded in 1958. And that really influenced, especially this kind of Silicon Valley environment and big tech developments. But I actually went all the way down the line, and this has to do a lot of the influence that Ranulph Glanville had, because he was very much involved with this cybernetics group. When I met him, he was the president of the American Society of Cybernetics. But here I have to clarify cybernetics. I don't mean it in terms of like computing will save us all and will be applied in every element of life. Cybernetics had origins actually in the late 40s with this Macy conference. And I really like that picture. And basically, it was people interested in systems. So you had mathematicians, physiologists, engineers, psychologists, anthropologists, Margaret Mead there being the only woman, all talking about systems. Gregory Bateson, I don't know if you read Steps to an Ecology of Mind, but it's like a brilliant book and nothing to do really with robotics or on computation. And from these cybernetics meetings that slowly, in a way, some of them kept doing really interesting things, but the boom kind of went into this kind of AI way of seeing things. Later in the 60s, a subgroup formed second-order cybernetics. And the main importance of this second-order cybernetics, and again, if you attended Paul Pangaro's talk, maybe I'm repeating some things, but very, very briefly, relevance of systemic thinking, embracing human complexity, but very, very importantly, taking the observer's observation into account. So what I was trying to do with my PhD was also, what if, and this is like a what if question, we don't take intelligence in this AI cognitive way, but smartness in a much more second order manner. So I completely sympathize with this quote of Winograd and Flores that intelligent is an attribute of an interaction rather than a commodity in a computer. And I think intelligence can mean very, very different things between us. So that to me was like an essential understanding. But now moving into practical projects, and again, like I told you, this lecture, I'm gonna give you a very honest journey with all the bumps. 2 years, paralysis, death of my supervisor, me trying to somehow do practice, not fitting methods. Finally, I came across these idiot concepts. But before any of this, they always push me, do things, do things, do things. So the first, actually, let's call it design research thing I did, was quantifying myself. Back in the time, was very, very popular, this idea of the quantified self. It's a concept by Kevin Kelly, one of the former founders of Wired magazine. And it's this idea that we need this self-knowledge to number. So we need to put metrics all around us to understand us better. So what I did is I have a jawbone. It's one of our smart wristbands, which someone gave to me. So I started quantifying myself. So I download the app, me not being a believer, but just to understand through my self-experimentation, what does it mean to be quantifiable? And I don't know if you can read from the room, but I started to get all these messages. And again, this is the time where I was doing my PhD. So I was like super tired, working until very late. Maybe another important element is I lived in London. I lived in a place called Stoke Newington, and my university was in Kensington. That's like a 45-50 minutes bike ride that I did every day back and forth. So one of the messages here in this app was, when you smile, so do your blood vessels. Watching dramas restricts blood flow, says the University of Maryland. But comedy helps blood pump normally. Reorganize your TV habits. I mean, none of this makes sense for so many reasons. Like, one is like, I never watch comedy. I don't even watch anything at that point of my PhD. Second, I love drama, and I think it makes me somehow happy deep inside to see those plots. But also, this was a clear example of pseudoscience. Then another message called Sleep Stand. You average 6 hours, 5 minutes of sleep per night in the last 7 days. That's 27 minutes less than last week. Reflect on the focus on the things within your control. You won't regret skipping that last rerun of Friends. I mean, I'm someone who I don't have Netflix or anything. The one thing I saw was Twin Peaks back in the time. It was completely inadequate as well. Not only, first, I didn't think reminding me that I slept 30 minutes before of a very, very limited sleep was helpful at all. But also telling me to stop watching Friends when all what I was doing is like either writing that PhD or having some kind of fun to survive the rest of the week. And then in terms of fitness, I was cycling and that was about it. So then it told me, thanks to your average of X amount of steps, I became part of the 10% of all the users. So then I was really concerned. And I was like, I'm a girl in my, late 20s. I'm just cycling 45 minutes. Cannot be in the top 10. Like, this is something really wrong. And then it sent me another message, welcome to the 4%. And I was part of the 4% females. Bravo. And then, I also was welcome to the Pedestrian Hall of Fame. So it's also very, very kind of Americanized. But then I was like, I cannot be that I'm like that top, top athlete. And then in this app, it had a place where you could also input food. First of all the options that were predetermined, nothing had to do with either the way I eat or the portions. Was really thought for people that drink like this amount of coffee or like have this amount of bowls but when I tried to input, because it's user interface, they were showing me what most people input. So it's likely that you are falling into that category. So the first thing I see was like hamburgers on bun. It's like, okay, if my competitors or I'm competing with people eating hamburgers #1 kind of thing, like what am I being measured against? Like, what are these rankings? So this was the first kind of self-project. It was very simple, but gave me an idea of something happening back in the time with these kind of apps. So some finding was the duality between statistical generalization and personalization, standardizations of shared experiences. I think the Friends was like a clear example, was full of pseudoscience. And I put two kind of, I thought were more funny to share, but then they would say something about drink this huge glass of beetroot, it would provide you happiness. But if you say that to someone with diabetes, you can kill a person. Like, this jar of beetroot has like so much sugar. So also I found this pseudoscience, actually, yes, it's laughable, but actually can be quite detrimental if not taken serious. And then I'm like, how are these companies working? They must have a division. They have like one kid employed to upload this kind of content that doesn't even understand. But ultimately also these things, they have no liability. So that was another interesting thing. And yeah, of course, a very specific culture embedded. So that was that. I call it a pilot project. It was not like a fundamental pillar, but to me it was important to self-use this technology. But then my whole PhD had another focus. My muse was the smart fridge. I mean, it's so interesting. The fridge, even as an architectural construction, a lot of these smart fridges are enormous, so very unsuitable for any European house, big markets being America or Asia, specifically Korea. They're very expensive, around $3,000 at the time. So then you need to set all these features. When you open it, especially this Samsung one has a very bright blue light. A lot of them have a window on the side, so it doesn't get hot if you have the fridge open. Some of them have a pizza specific box inside, so you can just put like a pizza box. So anyways, architecturally it was really interesting, and this is just like an anecdote. But when I did my viva for a PhD, I had printed a t-shirt of the model of this fridge, and my whole desk was with this kind of blue light. So it was really fun. And at the moment that my two, in the PhD in England, at some moment the candidate leaves the room, examiners discuss if you're suitable or not to be a doctor. So then I took out this t-shirt and I said, smart is listening, and I left it. So I also play around also with this kind of enigmatic figure of the smart fridge. But why did I choose the fridge? I think the fridge really exemplifies very well human complexity, psychology, culture, economy, and also contingency. And I'll move now to fridge projects. But when I wanted to go to someone else's fridges from a design research perspective, I received this message. Hi, Delfina, I just spoke to my partner and she's not keen to have anyone looking at the content of our fridge. So I'm afraid this is not gonna be possible, which also gave me an indication that also the fridge for some people is very telling. So moving now to the first fridge project, and there are 2 fridge projects. What I did is I wrote to people that were already quantifying themselves, telling like, hi, I'm a PhD researcher from the Royal College of Art. I'm really interested in Internet of Things and fridges. Would it be possible to have an interview in your kitchen? It's gonna be around 1 hour, and I'm mainly gonna speak about eating habits, the fridge, and fitness. Great, so I recruited some people and I went to their kitchen, and to me it was really important to be there in the kitchen and not like do a remote call or having a very detached understanding. So by doing that, I could talk to them and understand the characters and the cultures and how they live and how they eat. But also before leaving, I told them, I am gonna take a picture of your fridge, if that's okay. So they all said yes. And then I knew what it was in their fridge. I had a clear picture of it. So with this, I went back home with 2 kinds of information, qualitative data and quantitative data, which is what a sensor could get by the picture. And then I really wanted to explore who is behind this algorithm. I would like to question smartness and what would be the incentives if I put myself in the position of the smart algorithm. So now I had these 2 kinds of information, quantitative and qualitative. And I created an email account called yoursmartfridge@gmail.com. Participants didn't know anything about this. They said like, thank you so much. And I'm like, great, I will follow up. And then with all this information, I start creating these fridge reports from scratch. I just had like a white Google thing in front of me, page. So I'm like, okay, how I'm gonna talk to them? So I was playing with language a bit. I sometimes was very Google, like, hey, okay. But sometimes I was very Siri, like, why don't we? And then I was like, this smart fridge, what are they gonna have? Okay, maybe it's something about how the fridge is working, about the temperatures of facts. It's gonna have some advertising for sure. It's gonna have recipes. And obviously all this is about convenience. So it's definitely gonna have some list in which I can reorder things for you. So that's what I did. I put myself in this algorithm and I'm like, okay, if I'm now the smart algorithm of the smart fridge, what do I do with this person? And I really start having fun with it. So sometimes I did a lot of sense because I had an understanding of the person and I could see the fridge. So I did very accurate suggestions. There was this American guy that ate all this junk food. So I recommended this killer mac and cheese. And then I met with all the participants. So I went through all of this kind of information. Yeah, that was perfect. And then I also, because I had these 2 sources of information, did sense and also did nonsense, which I call it deliberate mistakes, getting things wrong and also making inconsistencies. So for example, there was this Brazilian girl who was eating super healthy and she had mayonnaise. Because a guest had mayonnaise and you know, mayonnaise can stay there because it's so full of preservatives. If it's like this very artificial mayonnaise, it can stay there for a while. It's like, okay, there's mayonnaise, but she doesn't like mayonnaise. But if I'm a smart algorithm and I care about the environment, it's good that this mayonnaise is eaten. But if I'm a neoliberal fridge, this mayonnaise has been for a long time. So maybe I should reorder new mayonnaise. So which of these decisions are the smartest? Is it about nutrition, then eating mayonnaise? It's a terrible idea. If it's about creating some business, yeah, definitely I reorder some mayonnaise because mayonnaise is old. So then I recommended her to this tuna mayonnaise salad, which really makes no sense for her, but I knew that. So yeah, then each of them, we went through all of these decisions. But other things that I was doing with the recipes, and I mean, I personally never cook and I have no books, so I'm not the right person. But whenever someone tells me like, why don't you try doing this? Either it's in a book or on internet, you will see you need like 20 ingredients. either it's a specific thing that is not in the supermarket in the corner, or you need to buy like 20 ingredients. It becomes to me very difficult because like I am just not that kind of person. But that's something that me not being from this kind of angle, really see that they order you so many things when you try to follow a recipe. So then I did this very long list of things you needed to do whatever you needed to do. And then I added this to the list. So not only I order many things, but also whenever I had to take a decision, let's say tomatoes, you can buy very cheap tomatoes, like Tesco £1, or you can go organic and take it to 6-7 pounds for the same amount. So it's like, okay, so what do I do now? What do I choose? So all this decision-making path, yeah, I really clearly depicted in my PhD. And yeah, some things I was trying to explore by being in the role of the algorithm was, what is the goal of this smart algorithm? Would I push the user to buy things of my interest? Would I push the company? Would I actually care about health and budget? How biased and constrained is my decision-making? Should I try to do an efficient decision, even if that is not really nutritionally good? So yeah, all these decisions were very, very well depicted. And then the second smart fridge project was the smart fridge session. And again, because I had to finish my PhD, my funding was finishing. I was really not very good in these methodological approaches. And like, I finally did like the first project, the smart algorithm, that relieved a bit my supervisors at the time. Okay, she did one project, but it was not sufficient to like do a PhD. My time was running out. And because I was in the RCA, I was really good friends with actually sculptors. A friend of mine that was studying sculpture back in the time, I was at Kensington campus, and Battersea was another story. And sculptors were there, so he left to do a residency and told me, why don't you stay in my desk? I was like, oh, actually, great. I really need to go away a little bit of the School of Design, and Battersea is great. Technicians are super helpful. And I really like the vibe of the sculptors, actually, much more than my little design bubble for a while. So I started living in the sculpture school, and then I met many really good friends. And one of them got this ship, HQS Wellington, that is docked near to embankment. So she got all this boat for free for a night to make an exhibition. This had many, many different kind of rooms, from like a dinner salon to like random little rooms. And then she invited all different kind of people to do stuff. So she said, do you want a room? And I said, perfect. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I need to finish my PhD. So the fact that now I have a room and a deadline kind of to target would be perfect. I just need to do a second project with this fridge. So that's how it really started. And it looked like this. It was really beautiful. I didn't do that. It was like all this water painted in the doors. But what I did bring was the blue light always. And what I did is I connected my computer with a projector to the wall and had two iPhones connected. My iPhone and someone else's iPhone. And I started these smart fridge dialogues, and I put different people behind this intelligence. And as you can see here, there were some elements I offered to them. So I told one person, you're gonna be the smart fridge, and the other person is, you're gonna be the user. And I had different things and they could choose. And I was like, if this was your fridge, this kind of door, you have to choose two things. And I had things like frozen pizza, broccoli, almond milk, cheddar, chip cheese, and those kind of options. And they only had fish fingers, which is the case here. So they had to show two things so the fridge can have an understanding of how that person eats. So what I did is I put in this role of the smart fridge, and I didn't say much about the intelligence. I just said, you're the smart fridge, you're intelligent, now behave like such through this kind of dialogues and get it running for like, I don't know, 10 minutes. I did invite professional people to play as the smart fridge. I invite interaction designers, nutritionists, programmers, bankers, script writers, user experience designers. But also because I was in this context of like this culture installation, I just wanted to have fun. And as I told you, eating is really culturally important. But also then, therefore I invited Italians to play as an Italian mother, a Jewish girl, Daisy Ginsburg actually, to play as the Jewish mother, British, Korean. Then I was like, oh, I'll take it far off. The Godfather, a French fashion designer, diva, an authoritarian general, a coach, a schizophrenic fridge. So I tried all kinds of stuff. And again, it was an exhibition. The point was just like, experiment. How would you react being in that position? So these dialogues are coming out when I invited actually professionals to play that intelligence. So this is the case of the programmer. What he did was to really negotiate what he would do with the data. So if you didn't pay, he for sure would have sold all the data of that person. So here you can see, these are screenshots, or I can reserve your data to third. Then the banker really was trying to push additional products, remembering he took these fish fingers and read like, oh, it's gonna expire very soon, we need to reorder. And he also did a partnership with Ocado, but immediate. This is kind of the first reaction, like all these kind of tradings and businesses. While this incredible scriptwriter really embraced this idea of sharing. So it didn't specifically focus on consumption. So here you can see the dialogues. Should we think about ways of saving you both times and money in cooking together? And then it really started addressing flatmates, and then it expanded to, why don't we connect to other fridge in the neighborhood? So completely different way of thinking. And this is again of this like funny Italian friend of mine playing as the Italian mother. It was really unbearable. It was a really, this is like actually one of them I would recommend most. It's very long, but it was being really unbearable constantly. Like the mother was knowing exactly what the kid should do and the way he should eat. So at the end it says, there's nothing wrong with me just caring for your well-being. And then the other user is like, I'm gonna replace you with an American fridge that will complain about junk food. But the whole unbearable dialogue, it's really, really, really funny. So how this all ended up, this is iMessage. So that's the only thing. So I had to copy all these like hours and hours and hours of dialogues. And then I did a thematic analysis. So I had to code all of this. And there were 4 things that emerged from a dialogue as a unit of analysis, which was control and power, understanding the smart world in practice, so communication and smart world characterization, commercial issues, and complexity and varieties in people's life. So the outcome of my PhD was evidence of lack of smart decision-making transparency, positioning oneself as an algorithm as a practice-based design research for engaging with algorithmic systems, this idea of the implications of relying of decontextualized data in smartness, and I related to one cybernetician called von Förster, and he said, with the essence of observing having been removed, the observer is reduced to copying machine with the notion of responsibility successfully juggled away. So whenever IoT reaches really personal aspects, to me it was really important to address how we see things. It's really, really, really key. This suggests the importance of rethinking the relevance of active presence of the user's perspectives in the smartness, because it's a relational system. And also the importance of questioning and critically thinking about this embedded epistemology. Where is it coming from? How do we know what we know, basically? And finally is the figure of the idiot as a methodological approach to stop and reflect. What are we busy doing? And after I finished my PhD, I was super interested as well in cities. So I was invited to write a chapter of a book that I'll show you in a couple more slides. But also at that time, cities around the world were absorbing as much of this technology, and they were competing between each other, which is the smartest city. And in general, this is the result of governments, big tech companies such as Siemens, IBM, Cisco, Google, and also a lot of those projects involve also star architects, and I'm going to show you some examples. Promises, cleanliness, happiness, these usually come with very odd happiness index, greenness, safety, livability, and all this is through urban planning and tech. And I really like, in this context, the critique of Shannon Mattern. She wrote a really nice article in Places magazine called "The City is Not a Computer." I mean, for any of you, I guess it's obvious. I mean, I don't think I should explain you, but a lot of these projects are based in that kind of understanding. Shannon Mattern also really addressed this idea that ecological and social challenges are systemic. We can't undermine deeply historical rooted problems, social injustice, of disrepair, high systemic complex issues. And for her, all these techno-solutionist approaches are very reductive and lend also to very precise quantitative metrics of progress, which makes no sense for the problems themselves. I also like a lot this idea of the future is not a solution from Laura Forlano. Future per se is not a solvent for pre-existing problems. I mean, now you can see there's a lot of master programs called Design Futures, and futures became this really important tool even for corporations, such as, like, for example, Arup. They're all with this kind of future areas, future forecasting. So she said, we must question the systems and society we're envisioning. It's not about extrapolating this, putting tech and pushing it years ahead. So for her, critical futures require deep and reflexive engagement in sociological and anthropological understanding of the consequence of design and technology. So she's based in America. In the United States, the future is usually synonymous of optimism, solutionism, and the promise of sublime technological future in which it is the machine that possesses the teleological insight. So all these ideas of futures are also very contestable, and there are many futures, there's no one future. And definitely this avenue of just embedding everything with the latest tech from Silicon Valley and push it ahead makes very little sense, at least to me. So I was invited later to write this chapter, which you can see the title. I tried to create the title with a little bit of programming language. So in Smart Cities, Void If Equality, this was part of a book called Equality in the City. And it was all about contesting this idea of the smart city. So I'm going to show you just two cases. One is Toronto, which in the chapter I call it as Google Urbanism. This project, the architect commission was Thomas Heatherwick, and the big promise was a greener city, zero emission, microgrid tiles capable of melting snow, absorbing stormwater, and directing traffic. Make life easier. You have these robots delivering mail and transport garbage to the underground tunnels, modular buildings, adaptable common space. So a really friendly render. But the big problem, especially because when you have Google behind, was that data gathering infrastructure built in these walls and in the urban infrastructure as well. So these are words from Sidewalk, which is a company from the Google perspective. With heightened ability to measure the neighborhood comes better ways to manage its sidewalk. Expect Quayside, which is the area, to become the most measurable community in the world. And why I really like this case about Toronto is because it was such a huge community revolt that actually paralyzed the project. They had this activist community called Blocks Sideways, and they made excellent questions, such as, what is the city's vision for smart cities? How will people's movement be tracked in space and time? The next question to me is critical. How will people, especially the marginalized community, including homeless people, be tracked? Who is the user that Sidewalk Labs is ultimately serving? Companies that want to learn about how people interact with physical spaces? Who will own, control, have access to the urban data? So this is a very successful case of how activism and community engagement really stopped such of a project. And I wrote this, I know, two years and a half ago. Out of curiosity, around 3 months ago, I was like, oh, what's happening with Toronto? Of course, Google is out of the question, but they're rethinking how smart cities could look if they have citizen participation, which I think is super interesting. And that doesn't mean it has to be a technocentric, fully technocentric approach. And another case is Amaravati. Amaravati, I chose it for a couple of reasons that I will explain now, but even when you see these cities, for example, Masdar in the desert, this is one of the early 2000 ones, it's all about being green. How smart is to have green cities in the desert, a place that never had water? So even taking things to such a simple questioning to me was like really, really, really important. In the case of Amaravati, it's called one of the fruit bowls of the region of Andhra Pradesh, which is the specific area in India. It's super fertile and it's has a lot of farming. In this case, the architect's commission was Fosters and Partners, so you can see how the render looks. So the promise, and a lot of this, and in many other places you have cases like in Nigeria and you name it, they all start the descriptions of their smart cities like inspired by New York, in this case also by like the Lutien Park in New Delhi. This green spine runs through its length, where at least 60% is occupied by greenery or water, designed to the highest standards of sustainability, energy efficient buildings with the latest technologies. They also have a citizen happiness index, and also they promise a biometric index. And to me, coming from biology, it really shocks me a lot of times how this computational logic is transmitted to landscape. A lot of this makes zero sense environmentally, and architects really questioned either the shapes they put into the landscape and also the materiality in which they're constructing this kind of pioneer, energy efficient, sustainable buildings. There's like very little understanding of ecology in any of those decisions. So I think this is a really good case of that. Specifically, to me, really importantly, is because this land is so fertile, but they encounter a series of problems. They also had massive revolts from the farmers, and the project is kind of collapsing, but for very different reasons of the ones in Toronto and those protests. So, well, again, how smart is to put these skyscrapers in this super fertile area, but beyond all that environmental discussion is, this meant that a lot of farmers would have to give their land in a hope of creating a city that was going to be focused on IT and banking. Banking and free zones are also something that is you can see over and over and over in smart cities such as Songdo in Korea or the one also in Nigeria. And for that, they created this really contested land pooling system in which farmers contribute and give the land to build this new capital city. I mean, the process was super interesting because a lot of this land didn't even have the legal papers. So it's like, oh, my land finished where the tangerine tree is. So you reach to that kind of problems. But also, in terms of when you had all these architectural grand plans, you reach ancient spatial traditions. In this area, they really believe in Vatsu. It's this tradition in which the alignments of building correlates to good or bad luck, which obviously had no coordination whatsoever with the Foster understanding. But also very importantly, they would stop farming. So maybe if they transition to a very amazing economy and that's really fruitful, yeah, maybe they will be happy, but they will not be doing what they've been doing all their life. But if that economy collapses, you don't have any more your farming land. And what happened with this is this project is on hold. Instead of this being the capital in the region, now the government start discussing, let's have 3 capitals, because India has a project of having 100 smart cities. COVID came, many other issues, and also now there are discussions of like moving this administration, Vishkapatnam, sorry for my pronunciation, which would actually leave this project up them. So deeply problematic. So yeah, question who is at the center of these formulations of smart cities? Values and politics behind this smartness really transform we manage, live, and understand them. So it's, yeah, usually you have a government, a smart tech, and maybe some fancy architect, not always, but usually. But who else should be in that smart committee of the city? I mean, definitely citizens, but I think there are many more relevant people that should be sitting there rethinking like what smartest really means for that specific contextual area. And just to finish my presentation, after I graduated from the PhD, I have been working at the RCA, mainly teaching. For many years, I was teaching, and I stopped doing kind of design research. I would say like 3-4 years, and then 11 at night, 12 being the deadline, it was this call for the design museum residency, and it was the first year that it was not designers in residency, it was the first year of design researchers in residency. I said, okay, I still have a little chance because I would never consider myself a designer, but design researcher was like a perfect chance to keep doing some design project. And yeah, I was very lucky. I was one of the 4 selected residents. And for this project, I was really inspired by this kind of techno-solution approach of the net zero strategy that came out of the COP in Glasgow. And here I'm going to read you part of the introduction that was written by Boris Johnson. For years, going green was inextricably bound up with the sense that we have to sacrifice things we love. But this strategy shows how we can build back greener without so much a hair shirt in sight. I'm not an English speaker. To me, that sentence, I mean, I'm still puzzled. But anyways, it was so telling. Basically, is we don't need to give up anything. Like, we keep doing same things that we're doing. Technology will be here. We'll take care of it. Don't worry. We'll meet the global climate emergency, but no with panic, short-term or self-destructive measures, as some have urged. Instead, we will unleash the unique creative power of capitalism to drive the innovation that will bring down the cost of going green, so we make net zero a net win for people, for industry, for the UK, and for the planet. I mean, I'm just coming here after a talk of Sir David Knight, which is the scientific advisor of the UK, in terms of how difficult it is to reach that 1.5. We really need to be ambitious. So all what is in this report, it's really far off from the radical ideas that we need to implement in order to decrease the level of pollution and emissions that a country like England is emitting at the moment. And here you can see in The Guardian, this article, current net zero visions are based more on a techno-utopic imaginary. A lot of this report talks about things that are not even existing, technologies that are not even in place, but they seem to be like the solution forward. This is a distraction from the pressing turn into a truly fully zero carbon. And here I put other gases, because also all this discussion, I'm available. So just to talk about carbon in the full report is so short-sighted. Pollution is so much more. So yeah, it was a very visceral thing that came to me, and I said, okay, I'm gonna work here. At the same time, there were 2 other elements that are important for then you to see what it came out. It was also the Ukraine war starting and the rise in the cost of living. And here you have this money-saving expert, Mr. Lewis, who was giving all this advice in like, how can we decrease our bills in terms of heating? So he was coming up with all these amazing solutions, like whenever you're sitting, put your feet on a stool, have a hot bottle, wrap yourself in a, how do you say when you camp?
A sleeping bag.
Yes, a sleeping bed around. Always leave some space between the couch and where you're sitting, so there's like an insulation between you and the couch. Anyway, so that to me was like, oh, that's really interesting. And at the same time, I am originally from South America, and Chile is one of the biggest fast fashion dumping sites. The Atacama Desert is now full of these mountains of toxic waste. And in terms of Europe, one of the main dumping sites is Ghana in Africa. And one of the students I was working on, she was from Ghana. So we were talking at the same time, and I'm like, go to the landfill. So you can see her there. And she was collecting all these kind of like UK stores that are thrown, and it's really horrific. She showed me pictures. The sea, because they don't use all the clothing that arrives, and then it rains, and all the excess of clothing goes into the sea. So you have the sea with sleeves and trousers, like all intertwined coming out from the sun. It's really terrible. And actually, this is a topic that I am working at the moment. But okay, I had Boris Johnson, techno-solution, lack of ambition, lack of radical imagination. I had these other two things that were happening at the same time: Ukraine war, cost of living, Mr. Lewis and the solutions, Chile, and this huge dumping mountain. So then I contacted two friends. One was the architecture firm Tierman Cruz, who at the moment they were, and this was a funny call. I called him in the phone, and he was doing a pavilion at the Venice Biennale about peatlands. So he was in the train 4 hours. I called him and he's like, I'm going to this. I was like, oh, that's great, such a fascination topic. I mean, peatlands, release of CO2, and all that, super interesting. I'm calling you for another thing, kind of related, but not. And he's like, oh, I am actually working in an interesting project. He was building in the south of Chile, that house. And a part of the house had no flooring, like zero, it was nothing. So you couldn't walk just with socks, it's just pure soil. But the interesting thing is that forest that used to be native was colonized by Germans who burn it in order to make it agriculturable. And few remaining native trees remain in the area, and the client bought this piece of land. So he was preserving all these native trees inside. And then I called a fashion designer that was working with Virgil Abloh from Louis Vuitton, who Virgil himself was an architect. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He died 2 years ago. But he was the head of menswear at Louis Vuitton, Virgil Abloh. And my friend was working with him, and he was developing all these buildings, kind of dresses. And what was interesting, nothing to do with this, is he had to ask permission for every single one of them. It was a nightmare to create a thing. And my first conversations was between the architecture firm and the Louis Vuitton designer. And all this came into discussion. We need to have an environmental approach to the climate crisis. We have architecture, we have fashion. Let's do something with this. And at the same time, my friend working at Louis Vuitton obviously had very limited time. He was like between so many collections because fashion is so crazy about that. And then I had a group of fashion students from the RCA. Joyce Adai Davis, she's still a student doing the landfill exploration in Ghana. Shanti, Sabas Alexander, and Rosa Aviles. And then I also had one student from Design Products. So this was the team. And we work with this concept of the architecture historian Daniel Barber. Maybe you are aware of him. Now he's releasing, this was like 2 years ago, but now if you read eFlax, he's releasing these really interesting stories, super into architecture because he's an architecture historian, about this After Comfort series. So I really encourage to read this series of articles that are coming specifically in this After Comfort. But for Barber, comfort indicates that one has risen above the inconsistencies of the natural world and triumphed not only over nature and weather, but chance itself. Design is part of this causal change, organizing and aestheticizing the connection between comfort and carbon. Comfort is destroying the futures. Buildings must be conceptualized, designed, and built differently. One of the things that also emerged in this conversation with the fashion designers and architects, it's like, let's don't do a future that is beige. Like, why is always this eco boring, grayish? So the motto is that an ecological future doesn't need to be beige. Beige is violently neutral. Luxury is beige. Comfort is beige. Beige is an anti-extravagant color. And this is a quote from one of the MA fashion students. Identity is multi-layered and complex, something a beige color palette does not express. In rejecting a regionalized perspective of luxury and modernity as beige, we present a multi-layered and varied palette representing a bright future, complex being with complex problems to solve. I'll show you now the final outcome and then I'll finish. But we were getting all the textiles from the warehouse before they were gonna be exported to Ghana. So we're intercepting, and Tim, my friend working at Louis Vuitton, was based in Paris. So a lot of these choosing what to do, him as like the fashion lead, was through WhatsApp. So here you can see how Tim was like, do this, do that, choose this, did that. And this is how the exhibition looked. For the architects, the architecture of the future was by no means like smart, connected. It was actually very light touch in nature, and we had understood as inhabitants, we are nature. There's not this division. There was also a notion of like this kind of nomadic group of people that were gonna move around, and very, very importantly, I'm going back to issues of the time. Fashion designers, one of them created this future inhabitant, and to me, it was really important to push why do we need to put at the center of the discussion the future inhabitant. It's because we cannot keep thinking the same way we're thinking. We have to re-envision ourselves living in a completely different way. So that's why we created this doll. The doll was created, with all these fabrics, but more importantly, it was made inside by this regenerative path called Saltico. Saltico, it's a company by some RCA students. And what they do is they went to Scotland, to the peatlands. And the peatlands now, they're drying out because of the temperature rise. When a peatlands dry, all the carbon that has been stored there for centuries is released to the atmosphere, and it's really detrimental. So what they're doing is they're working with the farmers next to those peatlands, helping to re-wet the peatlands. So you stop the carbon being emitted, and they collect these little shrubs around the peatlands, thanks that they're re-wetted. And they create this biopath. That biopath has an amazing structure, has like this shape, like an open thing that is very hydrophobic and is very warm. So all the future inhabitant, it is composed inside by this regenerative material, meaning that we have understood that being sustainable is not enough. We really have to push this idea of regeneration, which is bringing back health to the planet. So that's how we reconsider this future human. And also it has this dress that can be reconfigured in different ways depending in the season. And also it has an add-on part here. For example, if you're working in a table, and this is inspired by some Japanese, you would cover the table and the space around you. You wouldn't heat up the whole house. Architects also pushed the thermal comfort for the fashion designers, such as it used to be back in prehistoric times. And they also created a wall of sweaters. All this is all before it goes dumped in Ghana as an insulation wall. There are also these trainers created with a combination of threads. This used. And it's what was very popular was this kind of portable chair, and it's just done with a couple of t-shirts, again all these from the same source, with shredded other material inside. And the main idea is like, this society would also go out in the forest. This is really comfortable to lie in a tree. So that was the design museum exhibition. And I showed a couple of eclectic things from like quantifying myself, the fridge projects, some interest in the smart cities, and then like this final exhibition at the design museum. But I think if I should recap in what's in there, I think they all have an element of like, what are we doing, and really kind of contesting like kind of prevalent things that are coming either from big companies or some governments push in which they don't really reflect the need of thinking radically. And I think because of the level of the crisis, that idiocy and that moment of like, stop, like, where are we heading? What are we doing? It's a really important source of interest. Thank you.